So welcome, everyone. I was asked to begin with a little meditation, and boy, could I use it now. I have just finished a short at-home meditation in the practice of the Buddhist practice of metta, of loving kindness, which is essentially the wishing of well for all beings. And I think it's a beautiful, just take 15 seconds because I know we're late, and touch into your own motivation for the healing of the world. Thank you. So for those of you who are missing you catapulters who have been there in person in Oslo in early summer, and you get your funky catapult pants. I have donned mine this year for you, so you can see my cool purple pants. Come to Catapult Live and you'll get a pair too. I don't get a lot of chance to wear them, so it's a treat. And another treat is to welcome Charles Eisenstein, our guest today. Charles is a deep thinker. He's unafraid to ask, to question all orthodoxy, in my opinion, and even the commonest of assumptions that undergird modern society. And what a time this is for that. We're truly living in a moment of great global crisis, unlike anything before. None of us really know the long-term effects on the fundamental systems which govern our modern world, and we don't know the degree to which this period of digitally intermediated, echoed human interaction will become the new normal. We don't know if money will continue to hold its value. We don't know the degree or the mechanisms by which the stunning capacity of humanity to suddenly change our deeply held catechisms may be adapted to address the deeper, subtler, and more intractable problems we face as a planet. And yet our minds whir and tumble to find these answers. And it seems like this is a time to lean into questions, not answers, because if we ask deeper questions, we'll get deeper answers. Charles's book, Sacred Economics, was published in 2010 after the Great Recession. And in it, he diagnosed what's wrong with money, what to do about it. And I found that book incredibly moving, quite depressing and inspiring in terms of both the depth of the diagnosis and the aspiration for the cure. And one chapter in that book on sacred investing has an introductory quote I love from my favorite farmer poet, Wendell Berry, who wrote, "We have lived our lives by the assumption that what was good for us would be good for the world. We've been wrong. We must change our lives so that it'll be possible to live by the contrary assumption that what's good for the world will be good for us. And that requires that we make the effort to know the world and learn what is good for it." So Charles, you recently wrote a stunning essay called The Coronation that goes deep into the underlying mind states that give rise to our pandemic response, including things like society's panicked aversion to death. In The Coronation, you wrote that COVID-19 is showing us that when humanity is united in common cause, phenomenally rapid change is possible. What promising directions do you glimpse may be opened from the pandemic that go beyond the kind of immediate response?
We could pretty much go in any direction that we want to, but there's no guarantee that we'll go in a good direction. In fact, I think that the best hope for going in a good direction is to see so starkly the direction that we've been going in. because the response to COVID, it's nothing new, actually. We're being shown the extreme of long trends of social distancing, of germ phobia. I mean, social distancing, like it's this new term, but over my lifetime, people have more and more of life has moved indoors, has become digitized, has entered the private realm. Government surveillance and censorship, again, nothing new. So here we're being shown in sharp relief the direction we've been going, and thereby receiving a new data point. Because when something is presented to consciousness that had been just part of the environment, and seemingly this inevitable trend, this inevitable that we were barely even conscious of, then it's offered to us as something that we can make a choice about. So in a way, I think that one of the gifts of COVID is to show us the direction that we don't want to be moving in, and to show us through loss, the loss of festivals, the loss of group hugs, the loss of gatherings, the loss of yoga classes, the loss of churches, the loss of being able to go to the beach, the loss of seeing each other's faces in real proximity, the loss of all of the intangible things that cannot be converted into data and streamed over the internet. Loss, the recognition of loss, brings us into closer awareness of the preciousness of what has been lost. So we have to really take that information in as we move forward. So in a way, like all of the bad things about COVID can become, well, not all of the bad things, but many of the bad things about the response to COVID can feed into our construction of a much better world.
And what might that look like? If we think about the kind of mechanisms that society has mustered in this type of challenge for which our top-down hierarchical society is so well constructed, how might some of those mechanisms translate to the other kinds of problems that don't lend themselves to that sort of response?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like you mentioned earlier, you quoted me saying something about the rapid transformation that's possible when humanity is united in common cause. And humanity has not been united in common cause for an awful long time. Probably not since the 60s, when we really, maybe mostly speaking of the industrialized world, the developed world, which has extended to places that had not been developed or industrialized before. But in the 60s, for example, the space, the conquest of space, but more generally, the ambition to conquer the world. The conquest of nature was not even a bad term back then. That was a good thing. We were gonna engineer this baby and make it perfect, and engineer society and make it perfect. That was a unifying myth that society held, and that myth has been in a process of breakdown for a long time, so that there's nothing for us to rally together to do. Now, COVID comes along, and finally there is, at least temporarily, a unifying narrative that says there's this dangerous enemy, this dangerous virus, and we have to all make sacrifices in order to defeat this enemy. We've seen glimmers of this attempt to restore common mythology. That's why the US keeps starting wars and painting the world as full of these enemies, and trying to find some substitute enemy for the Soviet Union. We've been in an identity crisis ever since we lost the big bad guy that defines us as the big good guy. So we've been flailing for a long time. And in the communist world also had a big bad guy that defined themselves as a big good guy. So really what we're facing is what the malaise of the past few decades shows us is the decay of our basic mythology that told us who we were and where we were going. And it inspired us to participate in this grand project. So as now and I know many people participating in this, maybe still, and I would say I myself still have vestiges of technology is going to save the world. And I'm not saying that technology is useless or that it can't create miracles, but the question is, what is it in service to? And the old mythology that if we could only convert everything into data, then we could scientifically administer a perfect reality. That has been subject to a growing doubt for a long time, because, I mean, technology was supposed to give us a perfect world a long time ago. It was called the steam engine. It was called chemistry. It was called atomic energy. It was called nanotechnology. I mean, we've had one candidate after another of the world transforming technology, and we're getting a little bit cynical. Maybe it's never going to happen. So the question then that this is all bringing up for me, catching another glimpse of our power in coherence around a common narrative, is what is the next narrative? What is a new narrative? What is a new mythology that all of our powers, including technology, can be in service to? And I would say that this is a roundabout answer to your question, Adam, but I would say that that it is the mythology that we are here to serve life. First, to heal the damage that has been done in the course of the development of our powers, to heal ecosystems, to regenerate soil and forests and oceans. And then moving forward from that might take 500 years or so, but moving forward from that is to bring life, to make the world even more alive, and maybe even make the solar system or the galaxy more alive. We are servants of life. That's, and as Wendell Berry said, that when we serve life, and when we learn how to do that, and then we actually do it, it serves ourselves as well. We become richer and more alive the more that we make the world alive. And the more that we make the world dead, the more dead we become. Not necessarily that we don't survive if we finally decimate the Amazon. Technology is powerful. We could probably survive in domed cities with hydroponic factories and precision fermentation and animal cell cultures, to grow our food, and artificial atmospheres and geoengineering and bleaching the sky with sulfur aerosols and like, everyone in their personal bubble. We're already seeing signs of that. We could probably do that. The question for me is, do we want to do that? Do we want a world in which we are alone, no longer companioned by nature, no longer companioned by each other, each of us cowering in our aseptic bubble that protects us, in our imagination at least, from all possible danger? And when it doesn't work, when danger sneaks into the bubble anyway, well, you better make a stronger bubble, a bigger wall, a higher fence, a more complete surveillance system to keep out those bad guys. Like, that is one path that we're being shown, but we don't have to take that path. We can also take the path of service to life.
Yeah, and so I was just listening to Tristan Harris, who I first met at TED several years ago, and awakened me to the commodification of our attention that the large technology platforms are built upon. Do you have a vision for the use of technology that is in more service to life, in the way that you're talking about, a way that it would be in service to life rather than life in service to tech?
I mean, the potential is there. I think every technology that we have can be turned toward service. It's not so much that some technologies are good for that and some aren't. Each has its place. Certain technologies might have a much smaller place in a world that is geared toward healing. But nothing has been developed in vain. Now, of course, there's the way that we apply the technology that embodies and even prefigures the kind of world we want to live in. So we could talk about, the peer-to-peer revolution and decentralization and the distribution of distributed computing and things like that, and transparency and privacy. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that like ways, these aren't maybe so much technologies themselves, although it depends on what you mean by that, but more of how technology is deployed and how it's organized that make it a lot more amenable to a world no longer predicated on control. And really, one of the foundational pillars of the old mythology is that of control, that progress means progress in controlling the world outside of ourselves. So certain ways of deploying technology are much more amenable to centralized control. The alternative is trust. And that could be trust in your peers. It could be trust in the intelligence of nature, which doesn't mean that you don't participate. It means that you listen for what wants to happen and how we can, or what is possible and how we can participate in that, rather than imposing that on the world. So again, this would be probably more nuanced philosophy than we really have time for now, but I can just suggest those threads that we could follow.
Right. And what else? We're going to have a chance here at the top of the next hour for folks to interact with you and ask questions. But in closing, do you have sort of pointers or directions that this amazing catapult community, which is so enlivened for the use of technology for good, might take as a consideration, investigations to think about the harnessing of these amazing tools for the healing of the world, because this community uniquely, I think, seeks to unite those.
I'm not sure if I can answer the question, but I can validate the question itself. The question to follow is, what is the technology actually for? When it's not for extraction anymore, when it's not for domination, when it's not for control, when it is for service to life, like how do you apply it in that way? And how do you recognize the proper domain of a technology? And I think that actually the role of what we call technology will shrink, or I would like it to shrink in coming times, not to disappear. But I mean, do we really need an Internet of Things? Is that the promise that my refrigerator can order groceries for me because it's monitoring the amount of eggs I've got in there, and like then life will be better? No, that's not exciting to anybody, really. Everybody, I think, well, I don't know. It seems to me that the goal of the Internet of Things is to convert everything into data and to monitor every action so that we can control human beings. So anyway, on a deeper level, as far as the proper bounds and domain of technology, we have to think deeply about quantity and the idea that the best way to arrange the world is by converting it into a gigantic data set and then applying some kind of computing to that data set. That ambition rests on metaphysical assumptions that need to be examined. Primarily that everything can be measured, or that everything important can be measured, that there doesn't exist anything outside of quantity, that there are no such things as qualities that cannot be reduced to quantity, and that we are capable even of being objective in the way that we apply our metrics and our measurements to generate data to begin with, that there's not inherent bias built into our collection of data, our decision about what's important to measure and what isn't. Like, all of these assumptions need to be examined, because usually what happens is that the results of our computing benefit those who are responsible for generating the initial data to begin with. It's not so much garbage in, garbage out. It's like whatever biases and interests are, the inputs, those end up being reflected in the outputs too. So I'm not sure if that's too meta, but that's
no. I think I think it actually quite builds well on the previous session and on themes that are quite alive in the community. So thank you for reminding us, as you frequently do, of the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Allison, I will invite you back in to give us advice on how those who wish to have a Q&A with Charles might do so.
Super. Thank you both so much. So we are going to close out of this session here on the stage, and everybody can find us at the top of the hour in a session room entitled Q&A with Charles Eisenstein. And I'm sure there will be lots of questions. That was short, but incredibly thought-provoking. So thank you, Charles, and thank you, Adam. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. See you over there.